Hello again, team. It's Jess or JashiiCorrin, and welcome back for my January 2020 plan with me. Before we get into the setup of next month, we're first, as always, going to have a look at how December went. So as you'll remember from my last monthly plan with me, my theme for December was cocktails. I wanted to step away from the usual holiday theme spreads, and because it's summer down here in New Zealand, I wanted something really bright and colourful. So we had my splash page, monthly log, my holiday to-do list and mood tracker, habits and steps trackers, my social media scheduler and my doodle challenge, and my meal log. After this, we were straight into my weekly spreads. So we have the first week, the second, the third, which had a little Dutch door, and then the current week, which also has a Dutch door. Of course, because I'm starting in a new journal for 2020, we need to move this one aside and grab my next one. If you've already seen my 2020 setup video, you'll know that for next year I'm moving into this Archer and Olive journal. I'm pretty excited to get started in this one, in particular because of the whiteness of the paper. Before we jump into the time lapse, just a reminder that any of the equipment I use in today's setup is linked in the description box below. For any of you guys who have watched some of my monthly plan with me's before, you'll know that typically on the left-hand page next to my monthly splash page, I like to have what is essentially a monthly planning page, where I list out all of the elements that I want to put into my monthly setup. Whether that be colour palettes, font ideas, spreads to include, that kind of stuff. For this journal, I wanted to do something a little bit different, and instead of starting every month with the planning page and a splash page, I wanted to replace that planning page with a quote. This was for a couple of reasons. One, I always like to give myself some motivational words to help me get going for the month. And two, I've really been finding in my last couple of journals that I miss novel and decorative spreads. The quote pages give me a good opportunity to practice different styles of lettering and different styles of decoration, and plus they're always nice to look at. As you guys saw, I obviously went in with pencil first to draw this one out. There was absolutely no way I was going to be able to do this freehand. For our quote, "Slow progress is better than no progress," this one came from an image I found over on Instagram by Gregory Roy. There's a link to their original image in the description box below. They do some really awesome lettering art, and it would be totally worth checking them out. One of the nice things about not having my planning page here as I'd normally do is that you guys can't see how incredibly far removed this setup ended up being from my initial plan. Initially, I had a theme in mind that had a lot of nice soft pastel colours and some really gorgeous washi tape that I got from Rachel. But sometimes the things we envision in our heads have a hard time making their way to the page. Not shown in this video was the literal hour I took trying to get my splash page for January to work. Also not shown was the roughly 2 hours before filming that I spent trialing a bunch of stuff to try and get this theme to work the way I wanted it to. A whole lot of frustration and so very many compromises later, I managed to get an idea that I could make my peace with, but then when I went and tried to add that to my cover page, the regret was pretty instant. So after putting something down, not liking it, trying to fix it, not liking it even more, trying to make something to cover over it, giving up on that too, yeah. My theme for this month ended up being a somewhat minimalistic black and white theme which featured Zentangles. When I wasn't able to get my initial theme to work out, despite my many compromises, I went back to something that I always feel comfortable with, which is patterns. Don't get me wrong, I haven't given up on my initial theme, but it's just not going to be my theme for January. I think I need to do a bit of upskilling in some artistic areas before I try and tackle that one. For my splash page, I ended up keeping it really super simple with some white text on a black box. But, as I'd already kinda mutilated my cover page, I wasn't going to be able to achieve that with a pen. Instead, as you guys can see here, I jumped onto my computer to print off some headers for each of the pages in my setup. This is a really good way to achieve super easy but decorative headers with minimal effort. There are so many free fonts that you can download, and they can fit any theme that you're trying to achieve. Of course, doing headers like this can also be a way to cover mistakes, like I'm doing. To make sure that each of these would fit properly into my journal once I printed them out, I made sure to size each cell appropriately on the Layout tab after I'd measured up the spaces I wanted each of the headers to go into my journal. This also included playing around with some of the indentation to make sure that the writing in each header was in a place where none of the writing was cut off and it looked uniform. Going with the black and white theme, I filled the boxes in black and made the text white, but I also made sure to make the borders of each cell white as well. This made cutting out each header way easier, as then I had a straight guideline to cut around each one. After changing the alignment of some of the headers, depending on whether I wanted the header on the left or the right of the page, it was time to cut them out using my guillotine. This is probably one of my favourite tools for bullet journaling because having straight lines is pretty important to me. Because I wanted the splash page header to go completely from one side of the page to the other, I left one of the ends untrimmed. This was so that I could first stick the left-hand side of the header along the spine of my journal, and then once it was fully stuck down, I could trim along the outer edge of the page. With my quote and cover pages done, it was on to my monthly and gratitude logs. Prior to filming, I used washi tape here to give myself a guideline of where I wanted the decoration for this page. Having at this point changed my theme to black and white Zentangles, I figured I'd start with my favourite, triangle spirals. For this one, you start by drawing a bunch of triangles that all fit together. I used different sizes and shapes, but this one would work with uniform triangles too. To fill in the spiral part though, you start at the corner of one triangle and draw a line towards the other side of the triangle, so that the line will touch that side, just a little bit removed from the corner. Then you do the same to the other side of the triangle, a straight line that goes towards that side and touches just a little bit out from the corner. Following this idea, you end up with one continuous spiraling line that goes from side to side to side, gradually coming to the middle. Some general tips for this pattern are 1. Make sure that your lines are relatively straight. A lot of mine in this aren't, but the straighter you can make them, the more visually effective your pattern will be. 2. Make sure to take your time and actually touch the edges with your spiraling line. If you don't, the pattern kinda ends up just looking messy. A third tip would be to rotate your journal. I know for me there are certain directions that I can draw a straight line, or straight-ish line, and in other directions, not so much. It's also good to find a suitable balance between not giving yourself carpal tunnel and having nice tight lines for the spiraling by only going a small way out from each corner. Of course, the smaller the gap, the more lines you have to draw. In my opinion at least though, tight lines do make for a better pattern. I also like to make sure that all of my spiraling goes in the same direction, so for this one I went clockwise. Again, I just think that it makes for a nicer pattern, but you can get some really interesting designs by alternating directions with adjacent triangles. From the first touch of the pencil to the last touch of the pen in this Zentangle, it took me 55 minutes. Obviously, this footage is sped up quite a bit. Once the pattern banner was all drawn in, I added my headers with some double-sided tape. I wanted these to sit separate from the Zentangle, but still mimic the diagonal edges. After sticking the outer edge of the header down, I just ripped the paper along a ruler, which I had lined up at the same angle as the Zentangle banner. The ripped edges don't bother me personally, but you could always just rule a guiding line with a pencil and then cut along it with scissors to get the same effect without the ripping. Although it wasn't my intended theme for the month, I do really like how this spread in particular turned out. It's probably helped by the triangle spirals being my favourite pattern, but it was also fun to try something new with the diagonal banner. Once the headers were in, I used my S-size Pit Artist pen to write down the numbers and initials for each day of the month. This is the first time since June that I'll be using a vertical monthly log. I'm quite interested to see if that has any effect on how much I use this spread. Typically, I only really look at my monthly log once a week when I populate my weekly spreads. But with it being next to my gratitude log for January, and being the vertical style layout, I'm curious to see if my usage of this changes at all. Up next we have my habit tracker and before term 1 to-do list. The to-do list featured in my December setup as well, and is going to be transferred over when we get to the new year. Considering I've checked nothing off so far, there's still plenty to do. On each of these pages, I went with a different Zentangle pattern. So on the left we have a weave pattern, while on the right there's a pattern that I'm sure has a name, but I couldn't find it. Really, it just reminds me of overlapping planks of wood. As a side note, I do have a video on different Zentangle patterns that has a little over 50 different ones that are pretty straightforward to achieve. That one's linked in the cards above if anybody's interested. As I said, patterns feel safe to me, and they're one of my favourite ways to decorate my journal when I'm feeling uninspired. In terms of my habit tracker for January, I haven't quite decided what I actually want to track in terms of my habits, so you'll see I haven't actually filled this one in completely. It just has the numbers and initials for each day of the month. For that plank of wood pattern that we have on the right hand page, this is the only one that I did completely with a ruler. For that one in particular, I really wanted to make sure there was an even spacing between each of my lines, and the easiest way to achieve that was to use the dot grid of my journal to make sure that those lines were nice and straight. I did go slightly over on some of my ruled lines, but it was nothing that a white gel pen couldn't fix. For my social media schedule and notes page, I went with one continuous Zentangle banner at the bottom of the spread. Again, not too sure what this one is called, but it's essentially a zigzag pattern with vertical lines intersecting through each zig and zag. Another easy pattern to do. You essentially just play connect the dots with your journal. I also added some contrast into this one by colouring in every second segment in the pattern with my brush tip Pitt Artist pen. In some of the corners, I chose to use a finer tip pen to add the black, just because I wanted to be careful not to go outside the lines. Once the pattern was all coloured in, I just added the numbers for the days of the month and the action icons for my Instagram and YouTube posting to the social media scheduler. Again, although this wasn't the theme that I had in mind, I am pretty pleased with how everything turned out. I'd love to know what theme you were going with in your journal for the month coming. Feel free to let me know in the comments below. So for the final flip through, we have my quote and cover page, my monthly log and gratitude log, my habits tracker and term 1 to-do list, my social media scheduler, and a page for notes. Thank you for watching, team. If you liked today's video, please do make sure to give it a big thumbs up. And if you wanted to see more from me, feel free to go check out one of my other videos. Until next time, bye!